They say, if you want to see the future, look at Silicon Valley. But if you want to touch the beginning of time, you come here, Ethiopia, a land where coffee was born, where humans first stood upright, where ancient kingdoms carved churches straight into the earth. This isn't your standard postcard destination. It's a time machine disguised as a country. From bones older than history to landscapes that look like another planet, Ethiopia doesn't just tell the story of humanity, it is the story. And trust me, you've never seen ancient like this. Origins, where time began. The Great Rift Valley stretches across East Africa, like a monumental scar etched into the earth, a fissure that reveals the planet's dynamic interior, a visible reminder of tectonic forces that continue to shape continents. But in Ethiopia, this valley is far more than a geological formation. It is, in every sense, the cradle of humankind. Here, the very first chapters of our species are preserved, embedded in the soil, the rock, and the fossilized remains that have survived millions of years. This is the land where scientists have traced the origins of Homo sapiens, a place where evidence of upright walking, tool-making, and the earliest expressions of human ingenuity emerge from the Earth itself. The Great Rift Valley is not simply a backdrop. It is a laboratory of evolution, exposing the process of life unfolding over epochs. Every human feature, every cultural achievement, every civilization that ever rose or fell, has roots that trace back to this region. It is, quite literally, the biological and historical foundation of our species. In 1974, in the Awash Valley, paleoanthropologists made a discovery that would redefine our understanding of human history. Among the dusty, sedimentary layers, they unearthed the fossilized skeleton of a female hominin, standing roughly 3.5 feet tall, who lived more than 3 million years ago. She was named Lucy, after the Beatles' song playing at the excavation site. Yet Lucy is far more than an archaeological curiosity. She is a direct ancestral relative of every person alive today. Each one of us carries in our DNA the lineage she represents. To encounter Lucy is to confront the earliest proof of humanity's distinct evolutionary path, a path defined by bipedalism, tool use, and cognitive development that set our species apart from all others. But Lucy's significance extends beyond her mere existence. She serves as a nexus connecting modern humans to a deep and continuous history that challenges our perception of time. Imagine, if you will, standing on the exact ground where she once stood, the horizon empty, the sky unbroken by buildings or technology, only the wind and the shifting earth around you. This is not history viewed from a textbook. It is history experienced directly. It is the physical space in which our ancestors first assumed the posture, literally, of being human. The surrounding terrain amplifies the magnitude of this heritage. Lakes such as Ziwe and Shala, shimmering with flamingos and home to resident hippos, lie within the same tectonic rift that gave rise to early hominins. Volcanoes, like Erta Ale, with their persistent lava flows, stand as reminders that the geophysical processes shaping the environment of our earliest ancestors continue unabated. This interplay of living landscape and fossil record creates a rare convergence, a place where geology and biology intersect to tell the story of human emergence. Archaeological evidence does not end with skeletal remains. The stone tools, crafted with precision from local materials, reveal the earliest instances of technology and cognitive foresight. These artifacts are not merely implements. They are evidence of abstract thought, planning, and the capacity for cultural transmission. Each chipped edge, each flaked stone, represents a decision made by a hominin millennia ago. Decisions that echo across the millennia to shape the capabilities of modern humans. The Awash Valley, in this sense, was the first workshop of our species, the site where creativity began to differentiate humanity from all other life. The scale of time here is staggering. While most ancient sites on Earth recount histories measured in thousands of years, Rome, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Ethiopia demands comprehension on a scale of millions. To stand in the Rift Valley is to confront the temporal dimensions of evolution itself. One feels the almost incomprehensible weight of millions of years, a perspective that forces humility and reflection. Ethiopia is not merely old, it is timeless. Yet this history is not inert or remote. Among local communities, Lucy is more than a scientific specimen. She is part of the national and cultural identity. Stories of her existence are woven into everyday narratives, connecting people not just to the distant past, but to the tangible continuity of life in their land. History is not confined to museums or laboratories. It exists in the soil beneath your feet, in the rhythm of daily life, in the interaction between humans and the enduring landscape. Ethiopia's paradox is profound. It is simultaneously a place of extreme antiquity and of persistent, dynamic vitality. The Rift Valley, with its cliffs, lakes, and active volcanoes, reminds us that the forces that shaped early humans are still at work today. Time in Ethiopia is not linear. It is stratified, layered, and present in every element of the environment. To understand Ethiopia is to grasp a fundamental truth about humanity. Our existence is inseparable from the earth that birthed it, and our history is written not only in artifacts, but in the land itself. So, when you locate Ethiopia on a map of Africa, recognize that you are pinpointing the very coordinates of human origin. The kingdoms of stone and faith. When people think of Ethiopia, they often think of fossils and ancient valleys. But to stop there is to miss one of the greatest chapters in human history. Ethiopia is not only the cradle of humankind, it is the cradle of kingdoms, faith, and architectural wonders that stretch the limits of imagination. To walk through its ancient cities is to encounter a civilization that rivaled the might of Rome and Persia, yet followed a path all its own. Take the kingdom of Aksum, emerging as early as the 1st century CE. Aksum became one of the great powers of the ancient world. Situated at the crossroads of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, it commanded the Red Sea trade routes. From ivory and gold to incense and slaves, Aksum was a hub of commerce that reached as far as India and the Mediterranean. Unlike many kingdoms of its time, it minted its own currency, bronze, silver, and even gold coins, bearing inscriptions in Ge'ez, Ethiopia's classical language. These coins weren't just money. They were symbols of sovereignty, proof that Ethiopia stood as an equal among the empires of the age. But Aksum was more than an economic power. It was also a spiritual one. According to Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest said to contain the tablets of the 10 Commandments, rests here in the city of Aksum, within the Church of St. Mary of Zion. Access is forbidden. No archaeologist, no tourist, no outsider has ever been permitted to see it. Only a single guardian monk is entrusted with its care, and he spends his entire life in service to it, never leaving the chapel. For skeptics, this is a story bordering on myth. Yet, for Ethiopians, the presence of the Ark is an article of faith, and faith, as history has shown, often has more power than fact. Move forward in time to the 12th century, and you find yourself standing before another miracle, Lalibela. When King Lalibela declared his vision to build a new Jerusalem in Ethiopia, he was not speaking metaphorically. He meant a city of stone churches, each carved directly into the earth itself. But instead of rising above ground, these cathedrals were sculpted downward into the volcanic bedrock, as if the earth itself offered them as gifts to heaven. The most iconic of these is Bete Georgis, the Church of St. George, shaped in the form of a perfect cross and sunk deep into the rock. From above, it looks almost impossible, a geometric symbol etched by hand into the living earth. Legends say angels assisted in its construction. Looking at the precision of its walls, the symmetry of its corridors, and the sheer audacity of hollowing a cathedral from a single stone, one begins to see why such legends endure. Lalibela is not a museum. It is alive. For nearly 900 years, pilgrims have walked its narrow passageways barefoot. Priests have chanted in the hauntingly beautiful tones of Ge'ez, and incense has curled against stone walls that seem to breathe with memory. Here, Christianity is not frozen in relics. It is lived in sound, scent, and ritual. This intertwining of faith and architecture is not unique to Lalibela. Across Ethiopia, monumental expressions of belief punctuate the landscape. Consider the obelisks of Aksum, granite monoliths rising nearly 80 feet high, carved with windows and doorways to resemble towering palaces. They stand not merely as markers of the dead, but as declarations of life, symbols of Aksumite power, wealth, and ingenuity. For 1,700 years, they have endured earthquakes, invasions, and colonial theft. One obelisk, seized by Mussolini's forces in 1937 and erected in Rome, was only returned to Ethiopia in 2005. Its homecoming was more than a repatriation of stone. It was a restoration of dignity. Faith, of course, is Ethiopia's most enduring legacy. Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity developed independently from Rome and Constantinople, forming its own liturgy, its own rituals, and its own aesthetics. Drums and sistra set the rhythm of worship. Priests chant verses in Ge'ez, a language whose roots go back more than 2,000 years. Ceremonies burst with color, umbrellas of vivid silk, white-robed pilgrims, the flicker of candlelight. In Ethiopia, religion is not confined to Sunday. It permeates life itself. But Ethiopia's story is not exclusively Christian. It is one of coexistence. Judaism, Islam, and Christianity have all left their mark here. According to legend, the Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon in Jerusalem, ruled from Ethiopian soil, linking the land forever to the great narratives of the Old Testament. Islam also found early refuge here. When the Prophet Muhammad's followers fled persecution in Mecca, they sought asylum in the Christian kingdom of Aksum. The king, known as the Negus, offered them safety, an act of compassion remembered by Muslims to this day. This blending of faiths is rare in human history. In Ethiopia, it was not just tolerated, It was woven into the very identity of the nation.
You may live in Abyssinia in peace for as long as you wish.
That resilience is part of what allowed Ethiopia to stand apart during the colonial age. When European empires carved up Africa in the 19th century, Ethiopia resisted. At the Battle of Adwa in 1896, Ethiopian forces defeated the Italians, preserving their sovereignty. Independence safeguarded not just borders, but traditions, liturgies, languages, and legacies that might otherwise have been erased. Ethiopia teaches us something profound. History is not a collection of artifacts to be studied behind glass. It is a pulse that continues to beat, a memory that refuses to fade. In its kingdoms of stone and its traditions of faith, Ethiopia does not preserve history, it lives it. Landscapes from another planet. Few countries on Earth contain landscapes so extreme, so visually disorienting, that they appear to have been lifted from another world. Ethiopia is one of those rare places. To describe it as diverse does not do it justice. This is a country where fire and ice, desert and highland coexist within a few hundred kilometers. Ethiopia's geography is not just a backdrop. It is central to the human story, and it is no coincidence that so many of the earliest chapters of our species were written here. Let us begin with the Danakil Depression. Located in Ethiopia's northeast near the border with Eritrea, this is one of the harshest environments on Earth. It sits at roughly 125 meters below sea level, making it one of the lowest points on the planet. Temperatures frequently soar above 50 degrees Celsius, 125 degrees Fahrenheit, creating a climate so hostile that few forms of life can survive. The Danakil is part of the Great Rift Valley system, where tectonic plates are actively pulling apart, stretching the crust and exposing the planet's raw interior. In this alien environment, sulfur chimneys rise like jagged spires, venting toxic gases into the air. The ground is painted in shocking hues of neon green, yellow, and orange, created by acidic hot springs and mineral deposits that look like they belong on another planet. Salt pans stretch endlessly, white and blinding under the equatorial sun, giving the illusion of frozen seas in the middle of scorching desert. So extraordinary is this terrain that NASA scientists and astrobiologists regularly study it as an analog for Mars and Europa. The microbial communities that manage to survive in these acidic pools are teaching us not only about Earth's resilience, but about the possibility of life elsewhere in the solar system. And yet, for all its hostility, the Danakil is not abandoned. For centuries, camel caravans have crossed these salt flats, cutting blocks of salt directly from the ground and transporting them across deserts to markets. The sight is surreal. Modern miners with cell phones and plastic jugs of water, working side by side with camels and hand tools, continuing an unbroken trade that has lasted 1,000 years. Here, in one of the most extreme places on Earth, human tradition endures. On the very edge of this depression rises Erta Ali, Ethiopia's most famous volcano. Its name means smoking mountain, and it is home to one of the planet's very few continuously active lava lakes. Peering into its crater at night is like looking into the Earth's furnace. Molten lava churns and bubbles, spitting fountains of fire into the air. The ground trembles beneath your feet, and the glow of the magma illuminates the desert for miles. For geologists, Erta Ali is a natural laboratory, offering a rare window into the dynamics of Earth's mantle. For visitors, it is nothing short of primeval, an encounter with the planet's raw, living core. Yet Ethiopia is not only a land of fire and desolation. Travel north, and the environment transforms into the Simien Mountains, often described as the roof of Africa. These highlands, some peaks rising above 4,500 meters, present a landscape of dramatic cliffs, deep valleys, and jagged ridges. Mist curls along the escarpments, and the air is thin and cold, a stark contrast to the infernal heat of the Danakil. UNESCO recognized this region as one of the first World Heritage Sites, not only for its breathtaking geology, but for its extraordinary biodiversity. The Simien Mountains are home to species found nowhere else on Earth. The Gelada baboon, with its distinctive scarlet chest patch and striking social behavior, grazes in massive troops on the highland plateaus. Watching hundreds of them spread across the grasslands evokes a sense of prehistoric time, as though one were glimpsing life unchanged for millennia. Alongside them live the Walia ibex, an endangered mountain goat that clings to vertical cliffs with an agility that defies gravity, and the Ethiopian wolf, the rarest canid in the world, found hunting in the high-altitude meadows. These animals are not just wildlife. They are relics of evolution, survivors of a unique ecological stage. Contrast defines Ethiopia. Within a day's journey, one can move from the blistering furnace of the Danakil to the cool mist of the Simien escarpments. In the Rift Valley lakes, Ziwe, Langano, Shala, shimmering waters teem with fish, flamingos, and hippos, set against a backdrop of volcanic craters. The landscapes appear designed to astonish. At the heart of this geographic tapestry lies Lake Tana, Ethiopia's largest lake and the source of the Blue Nile. From these waters begins a river that flows thousands of kilometers north, eventually joining the White Nile in Sudan and feeding the civilizations of Egypt. Without Ethiopia, the Nile, as the ancient world knew, it would not exist. Monasteries, some dating back to the 14th century, still stand on the islands of Lake Tana. Their walls are covered with colorful frescoes of saints and biblical scenes, bearing witness to centuries of continuous devotion. These high-altitude plateaus and cloud forests are home to a range of endemic species, including the Ethiopian wolf, the giant mole rat, and dozens of birds found nowhere else. The moorlands, punctuated by giant lobelias, look more like the highlands of Scotland or the Andes than what most people imagine of East Africa. Its ability to confound expectations, to compress deserts, volcanoes, alpine meadows, and lush forests into a single country, makes Ethiopia geologically unique. Faith carved in stone. Among the most extraordinary feats of human imagination and devotion lies in the Ethiopian highlands, Lalibela. Here, in the 12th century, a king transformed vision into reality by commissioning a complex of churches that were not constructed, but excavated. Unlike the cathedrals of Europe, rising upward stone by stone, Lalibela's sanctuaries were hewn directly downward into the earth itself, sculpted whole from living volcanic rock. The effect is not simply architectural, it is geological. These structures are not additions to the landscape. They are extractions, as if revealed rather than made. The undertaking was driven by King Lalibela, who declared his city the New Jerusalem. In an era when pilgrimages to the Holy Land were often impossible due to distance and conflict, this was both a theological and a political act. He intended to offer Ethiopians a Jerusalem of their own, a place where they could walk the sacred terrain without crossing oceans or deserts. 13 monumental churches arose from this vision, connected by trenches, tunnels, and passageways that still disorient and awe pilgrims centuries later. Entering Lalibela is less like stepping into a human building and more like descending into a sacred cavern. The moment one steps below the surface, the air cools, sunlight falls away, and colossal walls of red tuff rise on every side. Carved arches, doorways, and windows appear with such precision that modern engineers remain astonished. There is no mortar, no scaffolding marks, no layering of stone upon stone. Each church exists as negative space, freed from the mountain, its form already latent in the rock before human hands revealed it. The most iconic of these sanctuaries is the Church of St. George, or Bete Georgis. Viewed from above, it takes the shape of a perfectly symmetrical cross, a geometry so exact it seems impossible without advanced tools, and yet chisels and hammers in the hands of medieval craftsmen achieved this feat. To walk through its trenches is to traverse a landscape that feels simultaneously natural and supernatural, a paradox of engineering and faith. The mystery of Lalibela is not only in its form, but in its endurance. These churches are not relics or ruins. They remain active houses of worship, filled with chanting, incense, and the barefoot passage of pilgrims who travel for days to pray at their altars. To kneel within Beit Mariam, or Beit Medhain Alem, is to share space with voices that have resonated against those stone walls since the 1200s. Few places on earth preserve such continuity, where sacred ritual has never been interrupted by time. What is equally remarkable is Lalibela's placement. Unlike Machu Picchu, hidden in remote mountains, or Petra, tucked within desert cliffs, Lalibela exists in the heart of a living town. Children play beside the trenches, villagers sell bread and honey nearby, priests bless congregations as they have for centuries, and tourists with cameras intersect with everyday life. The sacred and the ordinary coexist seamlessly, as if Ethiopia refuses to isolate its spiritual treasures from its daily heartbeat. Yet Lalibela is only one part of Ethiopia's vast spiritual geography. Across this nation, faith is carved into the land itself. On the islands of Lake Tana, Orthodox monasteries rest in isolation, reached only by papyrus boats that skim across the water, exactly as they did 1,000 years ago. On the cliffs of Tigray, rock-hewn churches cling to vertical faces, accessible only to those willing to climb with ropes. In Harar, often called the fourth holiest city of Islam, more than 100 mosques stand within its old walls, each testifying to Ethiopia's role as a crossroads of religions. The result is a country where Christianity, Islam, and indigenous traditions have shared space for centuries. This coexistence is not merely tolerance. It is architecture, landscape, and culture intertwined. Every monastery, mosque, and chapel is a physical marker of belief, carved into mountains, painted onto manuscripts, or sung into the air with voices that have never fallen silent. To stand in Lalibela is to realize that Ethiopia's contribution to world heritage is not only biological, through the remains of Lucy and the origins of humanity, but also spiritual. Here, humanity tested the boundaries of devotion and craftsmanship, creating monuments that rival the pyramids, Stonehenge, or Angkor Wat in both mystery and majesty. The spine shivers not simply at the scale of the achievement, but at the realization that it remains alive. This is not a fossilized past. Lalibela's sanctuaries are not relics of a vanished culture. They are living monuments where the sacred past and the present still breathe the same air. To descend into their stone corridors is to walk through time itself, time that has not ended, but continues. And that is Lalibela's enduring power. It reminds us that civilizations do not only leave ruins. Sometimes they leave sanctuaries, sanctuaries that stand not as echoes of faith, but as its unbroken voice. Ethiopia did not merely inherit religious identity from the outside world. It shaped its own, carving it into mountains and lakes, weaving it into the lives of its people. Lalibela is proof of this. Faith here was not built upon the land, it was born from it. Ethiopia, between earth and sky. To understand Ethiopia in its fullness, one must accept paradox. This is a nation where the past and present coexist not as separate chapters, but as layers of a single manuscript. In rural villages, injera is still baked over clay ovens, fires glowing as they did 1,000 years ago. Yet, within a short journey to Addis Ababa, one finds bustling cafes alive with jazz, macchiatos, and Wi-Fi. A metropolis where skyscrapers rise beside markets as old as the empire. Ethiopia does not present history as a linear story. Instead, it stratifies it, like the exposed rock of the Rift Valley, each layer visible, each still alive. The land itself amplifies this duality. In the northeast, the Danakil Depression descends into some of the harshest terrain on Earth, a furnace of salt flats, lava lakes, and sulfur springs where temperatures reach extremes that test the limits of endurance. But travel northwest, and the scene transforms. The Simeon Mountains rise like a fortress of stone, their jagged peaks slicing the horizon at over 4,500 meters. Valleys plunge thousands of feet, and the thin air carries the calls of gelada baboons, the lion-maned primates found only here. The Simeon landscape defies comparison. Vast, vertiginous, and almost overwhelming to the human eye. This is not simply scenery, it is geology staged on a grand scale, altitude translating into both ecological diversity and human awe. Among these mountains and plateaus runs a river whose name has shaped civilizations, the Blue Nile. Emerging from Lake Tana, it thunders into motion at the Blue Nile Falls before carving its course northward, joining the White Nile in Sudan, and flowing onward to Egypt. The significance cannot be overstated. The fertility of the Nile Valley, the rise of pharaonic civilization, and the sustenance of millions over millennia all trace back to the highlands of Ethiopia. Here, water does not merely quench the land. It carries history across continents. Few nations can claim to have shaped human destiny so quietly, yet so profoundly. Ethiopia, however, is not content to exist solely as a repository of antiquity. Walk the streets of Addis Ababa today, and one finds a city in perpetual transformation. Glass towers climb skyward. Murals explode across concrete walls. Music blurs boundaries, weaving traditional instruments into electronic soundscapes. There is an unmistakable energy, driven by a youthful population that honors its inheritance while reaching for reinvention. Designers reinterpret centuries-old tribal textiles into high fashion. Filmmakers juxtapose myth with modern city life. The result is a cultural rhythm that feels both ancient and utterly contemporary. Coffee embodies this duality perfectly. Legend holds that an Ethiopian goat herder named Kaldi first noticed his animals growing restless and energetic after eating red berries from a wild shrub. From that observation, one of the world's most significant rituals was born. Today, Ethiopia remains coffee's spiritual home. In villages, families roast beans over open flame, grind them by hand, and brew them in clay pots during ceremonies that emphasize community and connection. Coffee here is not consumed in haste, it is experienced. Yet simultaneously, Ethiopia's beans travel the globe, fueling mornings in New York, Tokyo, and Melbourne. In each sip lies both ancient ritual and modern commerce, a local practice with universal reach. This balance between earthbound tradition and cosmopolitan reinvention is what makes Ethiopia so difficult to categorize. One day, you may stand before the fossilized remains of Australopithecus afarensis, better known as Lucy, a being who walked the Rift Valley over 3 million years ago. The next, you may hear the laughter of children playing football in Lalibela, their voices echoing against churches carved in the 12th century. In 1 hour, priests chant prayers in Ge'ez, a liturgical language older than English. In the next, car stereos pulse with Amharic rap. Ethiopia collapses the notion of time as linear progression. It demonstrates instead that human history is continuous, intersecting, and still unfolding. Underlying this is a resilience that has defined Ethiopia's identity. Unlike most of Africa, Ethiopia was never colonized in the modern sense. It resisted the incursions of European empires, most famously at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, when Ethiopian forces defeated an Italian army and preserved their sovereignty. That independence left scars, but it also forged a national pride that remains palpable. It lives in the cadence of conversation, in the shoulder-shaking dances of weddings, in the confident assertion of cultural identity. Ethiopia does not seek validation from beyond its borders. Its history, its survival, and its contributions to humanity have already established its worth. To stand in Ethiopia is therefore to occupy a space between earth and sky. It is to feel the weight of geological time beneath one's feet, the Rift Valley where humanity first walked, and to sense the currents of modern ambition rising upward in the glass towers of Addis. It is to taste food that carries centuries of memory, and to listen to music that projects the future. Ethiopia is both cradle and crucible, a place where humanity began and where it continues to reimagine itself. Perhaps this is why the country leaves so indelible an impression. Ethiopia does not simply tell a story of origins. It tells a story of continuity, of endurance, of constant becoming. Time has not merely passed here, it has accumulated. And in its accumulation lies Ethiopia's most powerful truth, that the human journey, like the layers of its mountains and valleys, is never one-dimensional. It is complex, resilient, and alive. Ethiopia is not simply the land where time began. It is the land where time never stopped. So here's the thing. If you came looking for just another travel destination, Ethiopia will throw your expectations out the window. This isn't a place you tick off a list. It's a place that rewrites the list entirely, where human history, natural wonders, faith, and future collide in one breathtaking collision. It's the bones of Lucy, the roar of the Blue Nile, the fire of the Danakil, the silence of Lalibela. It's coffee ceremonies that stretch for hours, and mountain ridges that stretch into forever. Ethiopia is not just about seeing, it's about feeling, about realizing that the story of humanity isn't somewhere far away in a textbook. It's alive, right here, under your feet. And when you leave, Ethiopia doesn't stay behind. It travels with you, in the rhythm of your heartbeat, in the smell of roasted coffee, in the echo of prayers whispered through stone. Because once you've stood in the land where time began, the present never feels quite the same again. See you next time.